Welcome back. I'm here again with Angela Ford. Angela, welcome back.
Thank you. It's nice to be back. How are you doing this morning?
Doing well. And I'm happy to talk to you again because the last episode was extremely interesting. This is going to be, I think, even more interesting. So a lot of the remote viewers at Fort Meade would often look at what they would call off-world targets. They wouldn't be told it was off-world targets, but sometimes it was obvious because, at least in the early days, because there would be a designator that was not a numerical digit in front of some of these, like I'm making this up, like an R or a T or something like that. So sometimes it was fairly obvious. I think that was corrected in subsequent periods. But did anyone ever have you look at an esoteric target?
By esoteric, what do you mean? Because the only thing I worked on was with Ed Dames on Mars.
Yeah, so Mars would certainly be an esoteric target. In the past, people have also talked about viewing the dark side of the moon, Jupiter, Saturn. They also looked at targets on Earth, the 4 so-called bases that Pat Price first remote viewed. Lynn Buchanan looked at 64 different people right before and after death. So things of kind of that nature.
Yeah, no, the only targets I had were the Mars targets because I would be run by Ed Dames. But those targets are difficult because when you're training a remote viewer, they need immediate feedback, and you want targets that you have information about so you can say, well, you were correct there, you were incorrect there, and that's how the remote viewer learns. But with the Mars target, at that time, nobody knew about Mars or Martians. So you could you could do a remote viewing session and come out with this information, but nobody could determine, were you on, were you off? I think Ed believed in everything, what people were saying, so he would do his notes or make his notes. So that's why I think those kind of targets were you don't want to give those type of targets to somebody in training, and that's what he was doing. So, but no, because I think I kind of made a fuss about it too. I'm like, you can't do that because the remote viewer is not learning. So I think it was stopped at some point, which I think it really upset him. But no, those were the only targets I knew because I only worked with Ed. I did coordinate remote viewing. I learned it through Ed. It was just very quick and easy. I felt that people in the office should have been cross-trained in coordinate remote viewing and extended remote viewing. So I said, fine, I will do coordinate remote viewing, but I want the coordinate remote viewers trained in extended remote viewing. So that kind of went on for a little while.
So what about correlating with other people who viewed the same targets, or did you do it early enough that you were the first person to look at these things?
I don't know what other people said because only Ed had the information. I don't know what other people said, that we were not allowed to discuss our individual sessions, whether they were training or whether they were operations. Now, sometime in training, we would sit around the table and we would discuss the remote viewers' work in training. If there was feedback on operations, we would have a meeting and we could get information on the operations. But we did not talk about our sessions with other viewers. So I don't know what other people said about Mars.
While I think Morehouse was there, at some point in the program, after these off-world sessions, he was able to look at other documented feedback. There were file cabinets or files somewhere in the office where he can pull out prior sessions of the same target and then correlate certain things. And he said a lot of times there were differences, but in most cases, there was a high level or high degree of correlation. That doesn't mean that what people saw was 100% verified, but it's better than nothing. But it's not as good as actually having actual physical feedback from a real target. So just to kind of make it brief, and with full knowledge that what you saw could have been a pure figment of your imagination because you had no way to correlate it. What did you see when you
I can't even remember. I can't even remember. It was so long ago. He wanted to know if there was life on Mars. I really can't remember because I only did a few of those. I didn't do it a lot. At the time, I was working, trying to locate hostages in Lebanon. I mean, I was in a fully operational mode. So sometimes I don't think they liked me doing what I was doing with the operations. And I think there was a push to try to make me fit in more with the others.
Independent of the targets, have you ever had any other experiences related to off-world entities, let's start with off-world entities, physical?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. When I was about 13 or 14 years old, it was the springtime, and we were playing baseball, and it started to get dark. It was right that time between light and dark. So it started to get dark. It was in the early evening. So we started to walk home. And as we were started to walk home, you could hear this swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. You could hear like a whoosh sound. And we looked behind us and we saw a UFO. It just flew right over us. So we started to scream and we were like, look, look. So it caused people to come out. They were like wondering, people heard in their houses, so they came out. And then
now, where was this? What part of the country?
This was in Pennsylvania, in Western Pennsylvania, where I grew up.
Whereabouts in Western? Sorry, I'm trying to be very specific.
Indiana, Pennsylvania. It's right in the middle between Johnstown and Pittsburgh.
Okay. And then how far is that from Philadelphia?
Oh, about 3 or 4 hours. Philadelphia's on the east side. Pittsburgh's on the west side. I'm from Western Pennsylvania.
And is Indiana between the two, or is it?
Indiana is south of Pittsburgh and north of Johnstown.
Okay. And then this happened roughly what year?
1966, 1967.
Okay. All right. So 1966, 1967. Actually, that's interesting. I think there may have been an incident somewhere else in Pennsylvania. I'm blanking on the town right now, but that time period is around the same. I'll have to look at it after this episode. But there was apparently a crash somewhere in Pennsylvania where allegedly a craft was recovered, and there were lots of sightings of different entities during that period of time. But it'll come back to me at some point. But okay, so you're outside, you're yelling at folks through the UFO, and it was you and how many other kids?
Oh my God, there must have been 4, 5, or 6 of us. We ended up playing, we were done playing softball, baseball, so we were walking home.
Okay, so you see this thing, you're yelling at it, and what happens?
Well, then it kind of flew away, and then we talked about it. Well, school was the next day, and people made fun of us. They asked us what were we smoking or drinking or whatever, but then we just forgot about it. But years later, when I retired from the government in 2010, I had felt that I had had 2 experiences where I saw what it was sort of like a being that had very white with dark eyes. I felt there was communication. And then later, not too long later, in 2010, I could see almost like a spacecraft hovering about my house. So I believe it's out there. Soon after I retired, I felt like I had an experience where I was talking to an entity that looked like somebody. I guess, what do you call these people? I mean, what do you call the entity that?
So again, people have reported a number of different ones. There's the tall whites who are like chalky white, very tall, slender, big eyes. Or then there's the grays who are short, 3 to 4 feet tall, large heads, very large wraparound eyes.
Yeah, that could have been more like the grays, but I felt like there was a connection. I felt like mentally we were communicating. And then not long after I saw the entity, I would say maybe 3, 4, 5 months later, one night I went out to my house and you could almost see like the UFO hovering.
And when you had this contact, it sounded like it was just non-physical telepathic, at least with the
entity. It was non-physical telepathic. Mm-hmm. And it felt very natural. It was like, I'm like, oh, you again. Like I must have known him from before. But it was very natural. I was like, oh, hey, how you doing? Or, hey, long time no see. But it was very natural. And I felt like he gave me a healing. I don't know what he was doing. And then I feel like I gave him a healing back. And then he kind of disappeared. But it was very natural. It didn't scare me. It's like when I started to channel and with my ESP ability, it's very natural. It feels natural to me. Probably scare other people.
Did the entity have any messages or anything like that, or that you recall?
No, it was like, no, it was like he wanted to, I don't know, like he was kind of he wanted to help me, but more, he seemed interested in my health. It was like, let me check you out. Let me check out. Let me check you out. He may have probed me. I may have probed him back, but it felt natural. I wasn't in fear. And I felt like I knew this entity from before. So I don't know, was it in a past life? I don't know, but it was like, hey, how you doing? Long time no see. Oh, you again. It was that kind of.
Have you tried to reach out to that entity since?
No, because I think if they'll show up when they want to. Yeah, I try sometimes when I meditate. Sometimes.
And have you gotten any response? Interesting. So what do you think it is?
Probably a little entity from a UFO, probably a gray.
Do you think they had any interest in your abilities, or do you think they may have stimulated your abilities?
I think he was there to say hello, and he wanted to heal me. He wanted me healthy. Let me check you out. You need to be okay. And I said, well, let me check you out. I need you to be okay. But let me tell you did I ever tell you about my UFO apartment?
No.
Okay. I was living in Arlington, Virginia, and I was working for Army intelligence. I knew I was going to the psychic program at Fort Meade. And I knew that if I lived in Virginia and I had to travel to Maryland to Fort Meade, I would never make it because I didn't want to do the 395 Beltway or 495 Beltway. So what I did is I decided to move into Washington, D.C. I was living with my sister. In Washington, D.C., I could get to Fort Meade a little bit quicker, and my sister was working in Virginia, and she could go to Virginia to work. So Washington, D.C. was the medium point. So I had a friend, her name was Ruth Detroit, and Ruth was an older friend. She must have been in her 60s at the time, and she was living in D.C. So I called her up and I said, Ruth, I've got to move into the city. She says, come on in. So we were walking around the city, and we went to this apartment complex called the William Penn Apartments on California Street, 2231 California Street in Washington, D.C. She said, I used to live in that apartment. So we rang the doorbell and the manager came out and we said, I'm looking for an apartment. And she said, I used to live here. So we went in and I got a 1-bedroom apartment that my sister and I moved into. Well, about 2 or 3 years later, the manager came up and he said, the people down the hall are moving out. And it was a 2-bedroom apartment. And he wanted to know if my sister and I wanted it. And we said, yes. So we moved from 10 feet, we're down to this other apartment, 2-bedroom apartment. So I told Ruth, I said, oh, Ruth, I'm moving to, I think it was 205 or 105 or something. And she said, oh my God, she said, that was the apartment that I lived in. She said, that's where I used to live, that you're living in the same apartment I lived in years ago, whenever she was married and had her boy. So one night I get a call from Ruth and she's downstairs trying to get in. And she said, hey, I just happened to be in the neighborhood. I have 2 friends with me. We want to come up and see the apartment. So they came up and Ruth was going, oh, and your bedroom is where I had the baby's crib. And they're doing all this reminiscing. And this woman, Madeline, she said, Ruth, do you remember what happened in this apartment? And Ruth goes, no. And she said, this was the apartment where the first film of UFOs was shown. And there was a man by the name of Adamski. He was an Egyptian UFO researcher. And he did a documentary on UFOs, and it was shown in that apartment. The apartment, I think, was 203. 203.
Apartment 203? Okay, but by UFO apartment, that just means they showed like the first video.
The first film of it. Yes, and this woman, Madeline, worked with the Adamski, and apparently she had a museum somewhere where they would show, like, I guess they had parts or whatever But everybody that came through that apartment was UFO related. I can remember I would get congressional staffers would come in to visit me, and all of them claimed to have UFO experiences.
Interesting.
And then one night I got a call from a gentleman. He worked on the Intelligence Select Committee, and he was read on to our program, and he wanted to meet with Whitley Strieber.
Whitley Strieber. Yeah, absolutely.
Whitley Strieber. And I got a call from this gentleman, and he lived in Annapolis. And he called me up and he said, Angela, Whitley's in town. He's staying at a hotel about 15 minutes from me. He said, I really want to meet with him, but I can't meet with him at my house because it's too long of a drive. And he needs to catch an airplane back to New York tonight. So he asked if they could meet at my apartment. So they did. They came up. And I thought it was interesting that Whitley would be there. I mean, it just that apartment seemed to gravitate people who had UFO experiences. So they would come there and talk about them.
Yeah, things like this don't seem like they're coincidences.
No, I mean, Whitley showed up. Madeline showed up. Staffers were showing up that talked about UFO. I mean, it was a 203 apartment. The number was 5. Anybody that lives in a number 5 house or dwelling, it's an adventure.
When you say number 5, what do you mean by that?
203. 2 plus 0 plus 3.
So you're talking numerology.
Yeah.
Again, I'm completely ignorant. So does 2231? I mean, it adds up to 8.
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay. It's that does no. You're looking more at the I was looking more at the 203.
Okay. And what does 5 mean in numerology?
Adventure, creativity, people that usually study exploration. It means adventure, travel.
Interesting. And have you had any other contact with any of these off-world entities?
No, just the ones I told you about.
What do you think this is about in terms of your personal experience?
I think that they've been here. I mean, I think that they've been here all along. I mean, I think that, there are other dimensions. They come from other planets. Maybe they come from other galaxies. But there are entities here. I'm sure that from what I understand, there could have been more contact when Earth was first formed because Earth didn't have the density or the gravity that it had. I feel that we've always had, I mean, if you look at sites like Stonehenge, how did that get built? So I feel like it's always been here. It's just there. I mean, to think that we're the only ones in this galaxy or that there isn't anything else going on other planets or in other galaxies, I mean, that's a lot of ego.
It's a statistic impossibility, in my opinion. Yeah, I think people have tried to make the argument that it's a statistical impossibility that life could have developed on other worlds. But if we developed on this planet and there are trillions of stars, I mean, you would have to be a statistical moron not to conclude that there's something somewhere out there. And do you have a sense for, if that's the case, why some civilization hasn't openly revealed themselves to us? Or maybe they have and maybe the government doesn't want, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
I think they do want to make themselves known. I think we need a lot of help. I mean, I think Earth needs a lot of help. If we can get any type of help. And I do think that they want to help, but it's just a big fear factor. Mm-hmm. I can remember when I first became psychic and I started the automatic writing, and I would travel back and forth to Pennsylvania, from Washington to Pennsylvania. And my mother was taking a lot of ESP classes, and there was a woman that she was taking classes from named Alice Nichol, and Alice was a psychic. And she told me, she said, Angela, she said, you're very psychic, you're natural. She said, in your life, you are going to see many things. You're going to see good things and you're going to see bad things. You're going to see positive things. You're going to see negative things. And she said, accept the negative. In other words, don't be in fear of anything because that it's all part of it. It's all part of being psychic. Yeah. And I do work with other psychics, other healers, and they go through this big ritual of, I only want the white light. I only want positive to come in. I mean, they go through this. It's like it all comes in.
Well, light doesn't exist without darkness. If we didn't have darkness, we wouldn't know what light was.
Yeah, we live in a dual. Earth is, it's dual, black and white.
So I found out.
I kind of accept everything, and I don't live in that fear. Whatever comes, comes.
So I actually went and peeked at what that incident was in Pennsylvania. Where you grew up, how far is that from Kecksburg? It's in Pennsylvania. There was a UFO incident. It's called the Kecksburg, Kecksburg, on December 9th, 1965.
No, it would have been later. It would have been later, and it wasn't in December. It was more like April. It was the springtime, because we were just starting to go out from the winter to play baseball or softball or whatever. I think it was softball.
Yeah, so what I'm saying is it's not necessarily the same incident, but it's the same time period. So imagine if there was a crash, even in the U.S. military, you would have the U.S. military in the area. Oh, here's another way to confirm it, because you're not looking at it right now. Can you describe what the craft looked like?
Yeah, it was green. It was round with a ring around it.
Was it saucer-shaped or acorn-shaped?
Saucer.
Okay, the one in the Kecksburg incident is acorn-shaped, whatever that means.
Ours was saucer.
Okay, all right. Maybe it's just a coincidence. Maybe it's part of the same phenomena, but certainly same part of the country, similar time period. Because you said 1966 or 67, so probably 66, if it has anything to do with the other one. Interesting. Anything else on the UFO topic?
No, I mean, I believe it's out there. I mean, I'm always waiting for UFOs to come and help us.
Yeah, I almost think it's a developmental thing, right? If you ever, I hate to invoke science fiction, but if you watch Star Trek, they have the prime directive where they don't interfere unless a civilization is past a certain technological level, because you see it in colonialism, right? You come in and you give people technology they don't quite understand. It kind of stunts or retards their growth. And there might be some similar effect there. That could be one thing. It could also be that they want to reveal themselves, but the U.S. government has said, no, it'll cause mass panics and things like that. And there's historical precedent of that, right? With War of the Worlds. When that came out, it caused a panic in the United States.
But if they want to come, they're not going to care what the U.S. government. If they want to show themselves and come, they're not going to care what the U.S. government. They don't care. They're not going to care what the U.S. government says or thinks. They'll just.
So, why do you think there hasn't been some mass revelation?
I don't know. From what I understand is they do want to come and help. And I don't know if people aren't bringing them in because I don't know.
Any last words on this topic?
No, I don't know why they're not here or they're not showing themselves more. I don't know, but it could be maybe our civilization is holding them back, or something like we have to be at a certain point before they can come in. But I don't think they're going to really care what the U.S. government thinks. If they want to come, they're going to come.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We can't stop them. But
yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this video, hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.